In a lecture given by noted economic historian Neil Ferguson, he points out the fact that many historians of the British Empire criticize the extent to which the cost of maintaining the empire actually held back the British economy and stunted it in terms of the Second Industrial Revolution. The Second Industrial Revolution, pioneered by nations like Germany and the United States, pushed innovations like electricity, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals. And the British Empire, while still dominant in the world of textile production and manufacturing, began to fall behind in the economic sphere. Largely, these historians would argue, because it was bogged down by empire. I start this episode this way because there was an alternative way to exert political pressure and gain monetary value from places in the global south. This practice, dubbed economic imperialism, is still practiced today and allows a country or corporations based in that country to essentially colonize a place without any of the maintenance costs. Let's look at some prominent examples of this. We will start in Latin America. As you can tell from the title of this historical monograph, War, Diplomacy, and Informal Empire in the Republics of La Plata, which is the area around Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, kind of where they all meet around the Plata River. As you can tell, based on this, uh, there's a whole lot going on in this area, particularly in terms of what we call informal empires or economic imperialism. In the last episode, I discussed the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary, and how those two documents or doctrines enabled U.S. intervention in the nations of the Western Hemisphere. We're going to be looking at how U.S. corporations took advantage of this, namely through economic imperialism. But before the U.S. could even muster the naval forces to really get involved in Latin America, British firms were waiting for Spain to lose its Latin American colonies so it could step in. During the Napoleonic Wars and the Wars of Latin American independence, and later, as you see here, in the time frame 1836 to 1853, the British used all their power to create the environment where they would gain what Spain was about to lose. And in many places, particularly in southern Latin America, they were successful. Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, for example, was occupied by the British in 1807. And thereafter, they used trade policy to influence the government and policies of an independent Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay. This was short lived, however, since Latin American economic development was small and British merchants couldn't make a good living. In fact, a scholar of Latin American history, D.C.M. Platt, argues that the first half century after independence from Spain isolated Latin America from global markets because their populations were so small and production was so limited. It wasn't until after 1870 that we start to see Latin America develop along a more dependent, export oriented route because population growth and technology enable their profitable specialization into exporters of foodstuffs. Next, we're going to talk about the banana republics of Central America and Northern South America. So, you may be familiar with the clothing brand Banana Republic. For example, I know I have several pieces from the store. So, if you look here at one of the kind of original catalog covers, you can see that it says, right, Travel and Safari Clothing Co. So, right, it's this kind of imperialist image of clothing. So, keep that in mind when we talk about what a Banana Republic is. So, when we use the term Banana Republic, we're typically using it in a derogatory way to describe a Central or Latin American country where, through instability and dictatorship, a corporation, in this case, Banana, a fruit corporation, is able to exert massive political and economic pressure because the government is so corrupt. So, what we're going to look at is how this illustrates the theory of economic imperialism. In order to facilitate their modernization, several Caribbean Latin American countries sought out foreign railway engineers and offered them large land grants in exchange for building the railroads that would link their central highlands to the Caribbean coast. The land grants they received were excellent for growing bananas, and bananas, because they ripen so quickly, have to be harvested really quickly, really efficiently, and then shipped. So you have to be really technically advanced in your harvesting system, and this requires a lot more foreign investment. So one of the guys most responsible for this is named Minor Keith. And he's given this opportunity in Costa Rica. And in 1884, he signs what's called the Keith Soto contract, in which he receives a huge amount of land in Costa Rica to build a railway line on. Most of this is so like he has the land to build the railway. But the land that he is given is so much that he realizes it would be really great to grow bananas on. So he founds the United Fruit Company, which would go on to dominate the banana industry and influence the governments of several Central American countries for decades. For example, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua all fell into this category, and it only got worse as options for a canal through Central America became of huge interest to the United States. You can see here in this map kind of what is being grown and where, and it says even, right, the United Fruit Company's Caribbean Empire. Luckily for guys like mine or Keith, the repressive policies of Spanish imperial control and drawn-out wars of independence had led to political instability and a penchant for rule by military strongmen, or caudillos, who were desperate to maintain their shaky control. Companies like United Fruit would prop up these dictatorships in exchange for massive concessions on labor laws, land, import, and export fees, and even marrying their daughters. Um, Keith married the Costa Rican president's daughter, for example, in kind of this blatant power play. It was to the point where, according to Rachel Rozak, United Fruit even managed Guatemala's postal service. Like, what? And they owned 42% of the land. And they were tax exempt. So they are the biggest landowner. They are the biggest employer, and they don't actually pay any taxes. This is how economic imperialism works. For more fun, be sure to look up the role of the Dole Fruit Company in Hawaii. Right in this image, you can see one of the banana plantations and kind of how they work. While American companies are exerting their control over Central America, Britain is looking east towards China. As I'm sure you're aware, tea is kind of a big deal in Britain, and most tea in the early 19th century came from China. As we know, when British Lord Macartney tried to get a better trade agreement with the Qing Emperor Qianlong, the emperor basically laughed at him, arguing that Britain had nothing of value the Chinese emperor needed or even wanted. According to historian Tao He, this gap between British demand for tea and other Chinese products and Britain's ability to legally trade with China for these goods led to the development of a barter economy in which Indian opium, grown on British East India Company controlled fields in India, could be exchanged for Chinese goods. And you can kind of see that three-way trade happening here in this image, where we have India playing this big role in being the way that Britain can extract trade from China. Over the next 50 or so years, the increase in opium addiction added even more instability to the already tenuous control the Qing dynasty had. At some point, it said that up to 10% of China's population was addicted to opium. So that's pretty tremendous. And this culminated in the Opium Wars. In both 1839 and 1842, and all the way through to the 1860s, the Qing opposition to increased opium importation and use led to British military reprisal to protect what they saw as their economic rights within China. The Qing dynasty's losses in those wars led to not only its loss of political legitimacy, spurring the Taiping Rebellion, but also it assuming a subordinate status in world affairs, especially trade relationships with Western nations. Prior to the signing of the Treaty of Nanking, it doesn't show very well, does it? And the end of the Second Opium War, only one Chinese port, Canton, had been open to foreign ships and foreign trade was heavily regulated. The Treaty of Nanking ended that policy, forced open more ports, and made the Chinese government pay an exorbitant amount in damages, putting the Chinese in an even more subservient position and open to exploitation by the British government on the basis of repayment of this debt. In 1843, so the next year, France and the United States were able to negotiate similar treaties, and Russia did the same in 1858. A major component of these treaties was also extraterritoriality, where a foreign merchant or other national was not held to Chinese laws and could not be tried in Chinese courts, basically setting up a legal system of corruption that could go unpunished. These unequal treaties forced the dynasty to concede a lot of its control in major port cities, enabling the creation of what are called spheres of influence, where different Western nations were able to gain exclusive trading privileges within a certain area of China, giving them access to Chinese customers and the Chinese products that they'd long wanted. As you can imagine, this didn't go over super well with the Chinese people. See, for example, this proclamation from the people of Canton in 1842, titled Against the British. Behold, that vile English nation. Its ruler is at one time a woman, then a man, and then perhaps a woman again. Its people are at one time like vultures, and then they are like wild beasts, with dispositions more fierce and furious than the tiger or wolf, and natures more greedy than anacondas or swine. These people, having long steadily devoured all the Western barbarians, and like demons of the night, they now suddenly exalt themselves here. During the reigns of Emperors Qianlong and Cha Qing, these English barbarians humbly besought an entrance and permission to deliver tribute and presents. They afterwards presumptuously asked to have Chusan, but our sovereigns, clearly perceiving their traitorous designs, gave them a determined refusal. Chusan is another port. From that time, linking themselves with traitorous Chinese traders, they have carried on a large trade and poisoned our brave people with opium. Verily, the English barbarians murder all of us that they can. They are dogs whose desires can never be satisfied. Therefore, we need not inquire whether the peace they have now made be real or pretended. Let us all rise, arm, unite, and go against them. We do not here bind ourselves to vengeance, or we do here bind ourselves to vengeance, and express these our sincere intentions in order to exhibit our high principles and patriotism. The gods from on high now look down upon us. Let us not lose our just and firm resolution. So when we get things like the Boxer Rebellion, we really shouldn't be surprised. In both of these places, China and Latin America, outright political control and colonization would be difficult and expensive. So rather than a formal imperial policy forming, economic imperialism was used to extract special privileges for corporations or more favorable trade balances, cheaply and effectively for the nation state. Thanks for watching.